Life is Strange is such an interesting and great game. It let you dive into that teenage young adult drama mixed with time travel powers, and I've thought about that first game a lot since I played it. Every time I listen to the song To All of You, I get this feeling of just wanting to go back and see more of Max and Chloe. But there are 3 more games of the series, and all on the Switch. In my trek to cover the whole franchise before the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, we're going to dive into the second game of the franchise that isn't about college or teenage girls, but running from the law and unfortunately a lot of stereotypical racism. Let's dive right in. Here is my review of Life is Strange 2 for the Nintendo Switch. Before getting started on the story, this game is technically a sequel to Life is Strange. This and every subsequent game of the series allows you to tell it what you did at the end of the first game to change a few elements of this one to reflect that choice. However, there's very little in this game that even references the first game at all. One is a blink and you miss it moment where you get to see the first game's location and a cameo character in episode 5. But it's a completely separated story that outside of that cameo has nothing to do with the events of Life is Strange or Before the Storm. This story is about Sean and Daniel Diaz, 2 teenage brothers that live in Seattle with their father. While getting ready for a party, a scuffle with the neighborhood bully leads to a confrontation that hurts their father and a nearby police officer, leaving Sean and Daniel to be on the run, trying to evade the police until they can reach the border of Mexico and escape to freedom. As a story, this is very different. There's a deep family theme across the whole game with how Sean and Daniel's relationship as brothers changes as they're thrown into extreme situations on their road trip and having to survive on their own. From running into aggressive racist people that just want to hurt them to becoming involved in unsavory work to earn up enough money to keep traveling. It's a gritty game that shows an ugly side of how people can be when they let things like racism, faith, and drugs turn them into less than wonderful human beings. It's kind of like an anthology of locations. Each episode centers on 1 or 2 places the brothers stay and something happening that forces them to leave and keep running from the law. While I personally don't think many of these locations had quite enough time to really flesh themselves out, it does fit the on-the-run theme where the moment they start to settle, something happens and they have to move on. Though the interesting part of this story is morality. With dialogue choices, you can affect and grow Daniel's personality and how good or bad of a person he is. Shoplift and steal from stores and attack people, and Daniel will grow up with those morals. But if you make good choices, he will make better choices. The only thing is that it doesn't affect gameplay right away. The choices you make in this game are more or less going to affect future episodes and not what happens in the moment. Be a good person now, and Daniel will be a good person in a couple episodes when the really big story events happen. Unfortunately, Daniel is also the reason you will either like this game or hate it. Most of the conflict of this game is from Daniel and his growing attitude towards Sean. Even on a high morality playthrough where his dialogue and attitude changed to being a better overall person, I still hated his guts and almost didn't want to continue playing at all because of the person he is, especially in episodes 2 and 3. And his personality is even worse if you do a low morality playthrough where he doesn't treat Sean quite as kindly. Now, I personally had a similar situation with Chloe from the first game. In the first couple episodes, I didn't like her at all. She seemed like a volatile and toxic person, but by the time I got to the end of it, I liked her as a character. And let's be honest, Life is Strange 1 episode 4 was clearly there to make us understand and love Chloe for who she was. Life is Strange 2 didn't really have that sort of thing for Daniel. His character does turn around a lot in episodes 4 and 5, and he becomes a much more likable person. Speaking of episode 4, that's when the story really takes off and becomes a great story. It's a bit of an ask, but if you can make it to at least episode 3 or 4, the story elevates itself into something much more enjoyable. Episodes 1 and 2 had me kind of trudging through, not really loving it. But once I got to the latter part of episode 3, I couldn't put it down until I was done. When it comes to gameplay, this is a third-person adventure game with a lot of story and visual novel elements. With its gameplay, it's almost identical to the previous games where you walk around 3D environments, interact with people and objects, and make dialogue choices to advance the story. And before moving on, because I always like to cover censorship, the nude scenes in episode 3 are their uncensored versions. While I don't know what what region the censorship happened to in other versions of Life is Strange 2, the North American Nintendo Switch release still has that nudity intact. With main progression, the explorable areas of 2 are much larger than the first game, and there's no hub of locations. Since Daniel and Sean are constantly on the run, you're always going to new locations, very rarely returning to ones you've already visited. What you do is pretty much the same. You interact with a lot of things in each room, with Sean telling you his thoughts about it, and you can occasionally have little puzzle solving areas where you need to find items or locations to be able to move forward. You've also got a little bit of a money mechanic where you can purchase things at a store or market, but only if you have the money for it, and little segments where Sean sits down and draws his environment wherever he may be. It doesn't affect the game a whole lot story-wise, but it is neat to be able to see him visualizing what he's around and drawing it on his pad. The biggest change here is that there is no rewind mechanic. Sean and Daniel do eventually have somewhat of a supernatural element introduced later on, but they can't rewind like Max could, so any choice you make is what you get. Everything else is pretty much the same. You get dialogue choices to advance the story, some of them being timed choices, and at the end of each episode you get to see all of your different choices and what others on your friends list have done when you connect to leaderboards. Now when it comes to content and length, it's not too different than the first game, even though I personally think each individual location should have been fleshed out a bit more and longer. It still took me 20 hours to get to the end of the game. Next is presentation, and visually I think it looks fine. The models look decent and the environments are kinda half and half. Some of the environments look pretty good and others look a bit washy like they were in 1 and Before the Storm, especially when you have a vehicle sequence and you can see a lot of weird pop-in in the environments. I'd say it looks good enough, though Before the Storm Remastered's models still looked a little bit better than this. With performance, expect a lot of frame drops if you play in handheld mode. When you're walking around areas, the frame rate fidgets a good bit. You'll get some of these occasional drops in docked mode as well, but they're pretty rare. Docked mostly sticks to that 30 FPS. When it comes to battery life, we get a very slight amount more, but not very much, than Life is Strange 1. On the original and light models, Life is Strange 2 gets a battery range of about 3 to 4.5 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5.5 to 6.5 hours. In conclusion, Life is Strange 2 took the series in a very different direction, showing a lot of grit and uncomfortable stereotypes in its runaway story. Now, the downside, the Switch version has a lot of frame drops in handheld mode. The environments just look alright, and the way the story is shown will make you either like Daniel's character or hate his guts. If you can manage to trudge through to episodes 3 and 4, it turns into a good story, but you gotta get there first. Reviews to Go rates Life is Strange 2 for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.